today I have brought back the most listened to guest of last season, Melissa Riccardi. And for more background on Mel, check out episode 27, Your Inner Binge Eater is on Your Side, where we dove deep into Mel's history and how to address a struggle with binge eating. Today, we dive into something I once sort of shrugged off, and this was a long time ago, and that's inner child work. This idea that so much of what I struggled with was rooted in childhood. The reason I shrugged it off was because I looked at my childhood and it certainly had its issues, but it seemed kind of fine, like kind of regular, kind of normal, at least compared to some of the horrific things that a lot of people endure in childhood. But as you'll hear Mel say in our conversation, just because a childhood was normal doesn't mean it was healthy. We talk about how intuitive eating is the ability to tune into the body's wisdom, but if we're disconnected from our emotions, noticing something as seemingly simple as hunger and fullness can be close to impossible. We talk about the way we disconnect from parts of ourselves as children and how if we don't reconnect with those parts as adults, we'll see symptoms like binge eating, emotional eating, restrictive dieting, among many possibilities. We talk about the needs that we're attempting to get met with compulsive behavior and how things like creativity and authenticity and love are actually needs and not just luxuries. We address how unexpressed emotions get stuck in the body and how if emotional eating is causing you pain, that is a sign that you're ready to hear what it has to say. I hope you enjoy this episode with Melissa Riccardi. So you were the most listened to guest of last season, and for good reason. I was just re-listening to the episode that we did, and you shared your history with bulimia and binge eating and your healing and evolution, and you just shared a lot of practical stuff that folks can use if they're struggling in these areas as tools, not to get rid of or conquer their issues, but to understand them. And to see them as messengers and then to do something with those messages so that the painful symptoms like binge eating are no longer needed. And as I listened back to that conversation, there were a few pieces I wanted to dive deeper on with you. So thank you so much for doing this. I'm really excited.
Awesome. Me too. Let's do it.
Awesome. So one of the things that you said is intuitive eating is an adult's game. And I remember when you said it and it hit me and I was like, ooh, interesting. And then it hit me again when I was listening back in the exact same way. And it tied in beautifully with another moment where you said something along the lines of, we have to be parents to our own inner child. Now, I was definitely somebody who kind of shrugged off the whole inner child thing a long time ago. Like I would hear of the trauma that people faced in childhood. And I was like, well, my childhood was pretty normal. So that can't have anything to do with my struggle with food. But something I heard you say recently, and this is what I'd love you to dive in on, is that just because a childhood was normal doesn't mean it was healthy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What is the conversation that you like to have around that? Like if you start bringing this up with people and they're like, I don't know, my childhood was fine. This is just my willpower issue.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about intuitive eating is an adult's game, what I mean by that is if we think about intuitive eating and what it is specifically, it's being able to tune into the body's wisdom, right? But when it comes to binge eating and disordered eating, the problem is binge eating and overeating, it always happens in a disconnected body. And so in order for us to eat intuitively, we need to be in the body, right? But so much of the time, many of us go about our day and we're just so disconnected from our bodies. And so what that means is our physical bodies, but also our emotional bodies. We're not in tune with our emotions, like what we're feeling at any given time of the day. Usually, when I speak with my clients, a lot of them just feel an overwhelming sense of anxiety and they only feel maybe two emotions during the day. So they're not so attuned to the subtleties of the emotions that they're feeling. So the problem that a lot of people have with intuitive eating is it's not so much just about the food, but it's about tuning into the body's wisdom emotionally too. And that's where the problems come in, because a lot of people are like, oh, I can't tune into my body's wisdom. I end up eating a lot. But the thing is, we have to work on the emotional stuff and not just the food stuff when it comes to mindful eating, intuitive eating. So if you're disconnected from your emotions, there's no way you'll be able to tune into your hunger fullness signals because you're disconnected. If you're disconnected emotionally, you're going to be disconnected physically too, because it's all one in the same. It all has to do with the body.
That's a really good point. And something I hear too is that people will say, well, I do feel my emotions. I'm miserable. I'm upset. All I want to do is eat all the time. And so they think that they're feeling, but it's this surface level. It's more like they're thinking about how miserable they are rather than actually sinking in and figuring out what's going on here. So how do you get people into actually beginning to feel some of the emotions that you may be checking out from?
Yeah. And the thing is, when it comes to feeling, it's about validating the feeling that you're feeling. And a lot of the time when a feeling comes up in us, such as anxiety or sadness, whatever it is, we tend to distract ourselves with something else. And for people that struggle with disordered eating, it will be food. For others, it will be alcohol or other people or TV shows or work, whatever it is. We end up distracting ourselves and dismissing that feeling instead of really going into it, like you said, and figuring out and validating the experience of this part that's feeling sad, right? So instead of what we can do, and when I talk about connecting with the inner child, basically it's connecting and validating that part of you's experience. Because when we come into the world whole, okay? And what that means is we come in with all of our polarities: sadness, happiness, joy, anxiety, depression, frustration, loudness, quietness, all of these polarities and its opposites, right? And what happens is we get socialized into society, and what that means is the way that we get socialized is the people that we hang out with, the people that we surround ourselves with, whether it be our parents. Usually it is our parents because we see them most of the time, but the people that we hang out with at school or whatever. And usually this is between the ages of 0 to 3. We learn from them what is okay, what is not okay, what is allowed, what you're allowed to feel, what you're not allowed to feel. And we get that message usually through our parents' actions or our caretakers' actions. So, for example, I walk into a room and I'm really loud and excited and I'm screaming and my mum says, "Quieten down, why are you so loud?" If that's happening, then I will get the experience that that's not okay because I can see my mum's getting angry at me for expressing my feeling, my excitement. And so I'll be like, okay, because I want my mum's love, because I rely on her for my survival, naturally I'm going to disconnect from that part of me, my loudness, and I'm going to connect with my mum through my quietness, okay? And that's the split of the polarities there. So you now become your personality, and this is really important. The personality is the traits of you that were socially accepted as a child. Parts of you disconnected from because you had to, because of survival reasons, because you needed that connection and love from your parents, however you needed to get it, even if that meant disconnecting from yourself. If you think of the physical body, we can't really cut off our arm and be okay with that, right? We won't really survive. We'll bleed out, etc. But if there's also the emotional body, and our consciousness can split off into different parts, right? So we can be quite disconnected from ourselves with different parts of ourselves. So we become kind of fragmented. So we may be connected to our quietness and disconnected from our sadness. And the space between that disconnection, so the space between us and our loudness, that disconnection is what causes loneliness because we are disconnected from these parts. And the thing is, we can be disconnected from many, many parts of ourselves. And that's what those gaps, if you can think of all those gaps, if they start to add up, and that's what really causes the loneliness. So the job in terms of what I do is to connect people back to the parts of themselves that they've had to disconnect from in an act of survival when they were younger.
Yes. And it can be so useful to have somebody witnessing you as you go through this, because it would be very easy to, understand that binge eating, we'll just use binge eating comes as a messenger. And so maybe you're sitting with it, you're journaling, you're feeling what's going on in your body, and you realize, oh, I'm lonely. But then there might not be that next layer of connection where it's like, oh, I'm lonely because I'm completely disconnected from these 10 parts of myself. And we just think, I'm so be with people. And so we take up our time trying to distract ourselves with people, thinking that that's going to fix it. And of course we need community and support and love and all of these things. That's a human need too, but it's only going to be surface satisfying if we don't get reconnected to those parts of ourselves that we inadvertently shut off.
For sure. And if we don't have that experience of being validated as a child, there's no possible way we don't know what that feels like. It's kind of missing out on, for example, if someone grows up and they don't have a sense of smell, for example, they don't really know what they're missing out on. And that's the problem with people that say they've had a normal childhood, because a lot of the time, sure, you would have had your physical needs met, such as, shelter, roof over your head, your parents fed you when you were hungry, there was enough food in the fridge. But when it comes to emotional needs, a lot of us don't know what we've missed out on, such as love and connection, and safety, all of these things, because we didn't get that and we don't have an example of that happening in our household. So for us, that was normal. But then we grow up and there's missing pieces and we feel this emptiness inside, and then we try to fill it up with something because we don't know what's missing. We just know that something doesn't feel right.
And I think that we're not given that information that those things are actually needs. Need to be able to express. This is not just a nice thing. It's not or a luxury to be able to experience all of these parts of yourself. It is an absolute necessity. And we can see that in our compulsive behavior. That is an attempt to meet those needs. And that's why we don't have a choice in certain cases. If we're not going to go any deeper, you have to meet the need, at least on a surface level. And so you have to keep going back to it unless you're going to actually meet these needs, which can be so scary, right? Because they're the things that got us rejected at such an early age. We're so vulnerable and open.
Exactly. So if you don't get the need met consciously, which is really vital that you do, because like you said, it's a need. It's not something that you can choose to have met or not. Either you get those needs met consciously, or you will go about getting those needs subconsciously, which can mean manipulating others. And it's not a bad thing. Manipulation is simply being too scared to get your needs met up front and ask for what you want. So you go around the back door. It's not a bad thing. And a lot of people have a very negative connotation to this. But if you haven't been shown how to get your needs met and it's been an experience that's been painful for you to get that love, then of course you have no other way but to get your needs met, in a manipulative way. That's not your fault. But now, as you grow more conscious of these things, you can start to get those needs met in a more conscious way. And the thing is, with food, filling it up that way, it's like getting a bucket and when you fill it up with food, getting this need met through food, for example, love, it's like pouring a little bit into the bucket. It doesn't give us everything that we need, but it's enough to kind of fill up the tank a little bit to get us coping for a little while. But that your body knows, and the truth of you knows that you need something else, and that thing is missing. That isn't food. And that's why we can never fill ourselves up enough with food, and why you can't get full, because the thing that you're needing is not physical, it's emotional.
Yes, that feeling of insatiable hunger is not simply a physical thing.
Yeah, and our minds are quite metaphoric in nature. So if we want to go about fulfilling ourselves emotionally, if we don't know how to do that, we can't even think about doing that. Our minds will be like, okay, so in the most easiest way, how can I go about meeting these needs? With food, because I fill myself up. So let's turn to food. It's a normal thing, and it's quite smart of your mind to do this. So it's never a bad thing. I never want to make it bad. It's worked for you in the past. But if you're coming to the point now where binge eating is the thing causing you pain more than other things itself, or it's an addition to the pain that you're already feeling, then it's time to really do something about it, because it's a coping mechanism that's obviously not working for you so good anymore.
Yes, that's exactly it. I'm so glad that you said that, because as children, or when we're young, or whenever it is that we developed these things, it was such an intelligent thing for our system to do. We were taking care of ourselves. And something that I've been saying a lot lately too is that, just like you said, when it starts causing us more pain than it was before, when it was just meeting the need, now it's sort of meeting the need and causing us pain. That's a sign that you're ready. That's a sign that you're ready to address what's underneath.
Yeah, and it's normal to be scared about doing this work too. I mean, it's not, if you weren't scared, it'd be a bit weird, So it's normal if a part of you is a bit scared to do the work, because you will need to face yourself, and it is challenging work. But know that the thing is with our subconscious will reveal itself to you over time. So the more that we do the inner work, it's not like everything's going to come out and it'll be overwhelming and you won't be able to handle it. Usually our subconscious will give us things slowly and reveal itself. These parts of us will reveal information to us over time once we've reestablished that connection with those parts, and then it will share certain memories and stuff like that. So that you may not be able to, you may have memories that like you don't remember your childhood that well or anything like that. That's a fine sign, and it just means that, you know, there's certain memories that are closed off to you at the moment because a part of you was trying to protect you from a young age. But now in adulthood, you can start to work through some of those things and develop the tools to be able to do that.
Totally. Do you find that people that you work with have any resistance to, like, you know, they'll want to say, well, my parents did their best, and almost going into this work is having to admit, like, my parents did do their best and they didn't know everything and they didn't mean to traumatize or hurt or any of these things to me, but it happened and it has to be acknowledged. And, you know, they did their best still. Like, both of those things can be true at the same time, and we can still go in and parent ourselves.
Yeah, and a big thing is we don't see that grey area where we can see someone as, because when we're with children, we see our parents as God, right? Because we need to rely on them to survive. But as adults, and I get this a lot with my clients, and I was the same. I was scared to really, I felt guilty about really being angry at my dad. And it took me a good 3 years to be even able to express my anger, because when I was a child, I wasn't able to express that anger because it was met with more anger from him. So I disconnect from my anger. So it took me a good 3 years to be even able to do that, doing the work. So if this process is taking long for you, then know that that's okay. And what's more important is that you keep validating those emotions and experiences. But going back to what you said, it's really important that I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
Like blaming our parents for things, not wanting to blame our parents because they did their best.
Yes. So when we look at our relationship with our parents, in order for us to love someone, we have to see them for who they really are, right? The truth of them, and be honest about that. And the thing is, our parents, just like everyone else, every other human being on the planet, are not all good and all bad, or, you know, we have to look at the totality of them and see the truth. So in some ways, our parents were awesome. You know, they provided a roof over our heads, all these things. Whatever ways your parents brought you up, I'm sure that they brought you up in awesome ways too. But it's important to be honest about the areas which you didn't get your emotional needs met. And it's not about so much blaming them, but being honest with yourself about that, because there's a truth that you know, that your own body knows. And if you don't speak that truth to yourself, then that's going to cause a disconnect from you and the parts of yourself, right? So we need to be completely truthful to ourselves. And yes, our parents may not have given this to us, and it's okay to admit it. Doesn't make us a bad person. It doesn't make your parents a bad person. But being honest bridges the gap and allows us to have the best relationship with our parents that we can, because now we're coming from a place of truth and honesty. And the feelings that we felt when we were younger, those are our experiences of them, right? And it's not so much that they were the truth necessarily, but we need to validate our own experiences of what happened and our own feelings, regardless of what actually happened. And I have the best relationship with my mum now. It's much closer than I ever was. And I explained to her some of the things that she didn't do in my childhood that I needed her to do, some of the things that she did that really affected me deeply. And we have the best relationship now. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to do that, but validating that experience of what happened to you and your feelings in certain times in your life with yourself is really the number one thing, because a part of you knows the truth. And if another part of you is kind of, like trying to dismiss what happened or reject it, then that's not love. Love is accepting the flaws of people and loving them anyway through that. It's an acceptance, right? So we need to accept the flaws just as much as we accept the great things that we like and love about people.
And I think too, it can be really overwhelming. I think people get caught in this idea that, like, oh my God, well, now that I'm looking at this, I probably have so much childhood trauma and stuff to work through. And I've heard people say, like, well, I'm just going to be working this out for the rest of my life. And we are growing for our entire lives. Absolutely. But I think it can sound very, very heavy. Really, I think it's like you were saying, only what we're capable of processing comes up at any given time. And if it feels like too much, like we don't have to take on more than we feel like we can take on. And any little bit of processing is going to feel a little bit better. Any new bit of expression, any new, part of us that we find that we love and nurture is going to feel better. Like that's all you need to feel better and better and better and better as you go. It's not like once I get the childhood trauma out of the way, then I'll be good, then I'll be healed, then I'll be fine.
Yeah, your inner child will be with you for the rest of your life. It's about building connections with those parts of you, with your anxiety, with your sadness, with your joy, all of those parts, and bringing them along for the ride as opposed to them feeling stuck in a memory that was the past. So really working through those traumas on a deep, deep level and reestablishing that connection will allow you not to have to necessarily work on the big, big things, because once you get the big things out of the way, the big things that happened to you in the past, the core beliefs that you might have had of not being good enough, not being worthy, for example, those big things, once you get them fixed, then it will be really the minor things that may trigger. You won't feel triggered as often as you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You told us a lot about your journey, more specifically with food and binge eating last time, but I'm curious, like if this seems a little bit airy for people, they're like, I don't know what needs I have or what parts of me I've cut off. Do you mind sharing a bit of your own experience? Like you talked about anger and your dad and working through that. Like what has your process with this been like?
Yeah, sure. So when I was a child, my dad was he was a lovely person, but then sometimes sporadically he'd get angry at me about things that I had no idea why. They were like very small things that something to do with the dishes or something like that. And he'd scream my name, I'd come in, and it would be quite, if you can imagine, because when we look at it from an adult perspective, it may not seem like a big deal, but if you can imagine to a child being screamed at from across the house to come in, and then the thing is I would try and stand up for myself. But then my dad would get angry in return. So then I would have to pipe down and lessen myself. And then I would end up going to my room crying. And my mum would come in and she would tell me to apologize to my dad. So a few things happened there. And a couple of them. So first thing, my feelings weren't being validated, because when I would get angry and try to protect myself, my dad wouldn't validate that experience of me feeling angry. Right. And the second thing is my mum would come in and not validate my experience either. And the thing is, we know the truth of how we're feeling, but when someone doesn't mirror that back to us, then it's very confusing for a child. So it was very confusing for me to feel that anger, and then my mum say for me to apologize and to not feel that anger. So it's kind of like, but this is how I'm feeling, so I'm very confused. So then I would disconnect from my anger because I needed my mum's love. So I suppressed that anger for a long time, and it would come up I'm not saying that I wouldn't feel anger, but it would come up randomly, and it would be like explosive anger where I'd get to the point where I'd just explode with people and make it get to the brink of just randomly. It would be such a little thing, but then I'd get really pissed off about something. Right. And my mum was quite passive aggressive when I was a child. So I developed that trait within myself too, and basically I feel safe expressing my needs and what. So the big process for me was feeling safe in my anger. So the first thing when we do the inner child work is really feeling. First of all, we need to have the experience of feeling safe with these feelings, because in the past we haven't had the experience of these feelings being safe for us to experience. So that's where it helps to have a person like a mentor or a coach, because they're able to validate and mirror that experience for you. Yes, when you were a child, you were angry. Absolutely. You deserve to be angry. I can totally understand why you would have been angry in that situation. Having someone validate that experience is the best thing that you can do, whether you do it for yourself or maybe you can have a friend do that. It doesn't have to be a coach necessarily, but you need to have that experience validated. And then even then I was quite scared of my anger, because I didn't want it to be explosive, or I didn't want it to result in something that was like I would hurt someone or something like that. So I had some beliefs about my anger, that anger was bad, that I wasn't allowed to feel anger. So I went through this whole process of developing a connection with my anger, and really trying to, one thing that I do with my clients and myself, I allow that part of me that's angry or whatever I'm feeling, whatever I'm trying to work on, to really take over my whole body so I can experience what thoughts anger is feeling. So kind of my whole body becomes anger. So I can feel what thoughts it's feeling, what the sensations feel like of anger, how anger walks, how it moves, how it sits, like how it breathes. I really want to, so then it's me kind of accepting and validating that anger completely. And then I ask my anger, like, how come you're feeling angry right now? And just try to understand it like it was a small child. Yeah. What was the best experience or memory that I have of being angry? But first, the number one thing to do is to really allow anger to feel safe, and that's by validating the anger. So by saying, I understand that you feel anger, and that's okay. It's completely okay that you feel angry right now. Mm-hmm. And that just allows that part to soften. If you think of someone saying that to you, it's completely okay that you're feeling this way. Like that just feels, it makes you soften in your body. How can it not? Someone else is validating your experience, whether they really connect with it or not. They're saying it's okay to feel this way regardless of what's going on. And for that, that's extremely healing for someone.
Oh, 100%, especially if it's the first time you're experiencing that in your life.
Yeah, and also it can be quite scary, and you want to reject that too, because I find that within myself and someone else, like some of my clients, they'll be like, oh, it's okay, I don't want you to feel sorry for me, it's fine. Like they'll try and dismiss it because they haven't felt that connection. It's very uncomfortable. And the thing is, feelings that are uncomfortable aren't necessarily anger or depression or sadness or whatever. Sometimes they're the happy one, like the happy emotions, the quote unquote positive ones, right? The joy. Sometimes those are just as uncomfortable because we haven't had the experience of that being safe for us. Like I said, with the excitement, if my mum said, oh, why are you so excited? Quieten down. Then that would be quite stressful for my body to feel that. I got pain experiencing that excitement. So it's not so much quote negative ones, which I don't like to call it that. I'd say the darker emotions.
Yeah. Do you find with the discomfort feeling more positive emotions, do you find that people start to have maybe ease with intuitive eating, or they're not binging so much, or they're not thinking about food so much, and they get really uncomfortable, like they're not actually used to ease or feeling good, and you have to work on that side of things?
Yeah. So when it comes to slowing down eating, and I know we're trained in the same thing, but the slow down eating, they find it challenging to really just be with themselves and slow down. It brings up all your feelings, which isn't a bad thing. That's exactly what we want to happen. We want the triggers to come up because you've been suppressing them through different coping mechanisms, food, for example. And so the fact that you're slowing down in these, it's making you feel uncomfortable, is awesome, because now we can connect with that feeling. And it's like a child that when those things come up, it's like a child, if you can imagine a child coming up next to you and tapping you on the shoulder. That's exactly what these feelings are that come up with uncomfortableness. And the uncomfortableness is, our uncomfortable feelings are simply feelings that we felt unsafe feeling when we were a child. So it's normal for them to feel uncomfortable. What we want to do is try and establish a relationship with them through safety first. And what I do with my clients and with myself is I always establish a safety figure first. So I want you to imagine a place or something somewhere in your mind. It can be imagined or an actual place somewhere in your mind that feels safe for you. It could be maybe a sound. How does it feel? How does it sound? What's there? Are there any particular physical objects that make you feel safe? Is there a safety figure specifically? It could be from a movie, a cartoon, something imagined. It might be a really big person or overpowering person. So establishing a safety figure is really important, because when we delve into these emotions, I want you to have an experience of being able to come back to that safe place, come back to that safety figure, or have that safety figure help you in the scenario and emotion and memory that you're going into. So that's really important.
So then moving on from there, something I wanted to ask you about was when you were talking about embodying anger. So actually going into feeling the emotion, and you talked about the sensation of the emotion. And I think that we can only talk about this stuff so much before we have to get into the body. Like, you could know all of your childhood wounds and all of your childhood traumas and everything that ever happened to you. And like, what good is it? It's minimally interesting.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's really interesting, but it's not really the healing work, even if you know everything. So like, getting into the body and feeling the sensations, for people who are like, I don't really know what that means. Like, would you mind describing, like, what does anger feel like in your body when you're letting yourself experience it? You're walking around, like, what are just the physical nitty gritty things that you experience?
Yeah. So anger for me is a fiery kind of a sensation. It's a sensation that makes me want to move my body. It's a sensation that is I call it an outward kind of a sensation where it needs to be expressed, like it needs to be let out. And whether it be, you know, when I take on my anger, when I allow it to penetrate my body and take over my body, I always have like a pillow or something I can hit, because the anger is quite, like, it's kind of like letting off steam. It's that type of energy. And we need something to feel that anger. And the thing is, there's always a layer underneath anger, usually because anger is quite a superficial emotion. It's usually a secondary emotion. So we have to get one beneath that. What's beneath the anger that you're feeling? Because anger is a boundary that was violated in us. You know, it's a boundary we need to set, or a boundary that was violated that we need to stand up for ourselves in. So being able to really take out that energy first is really important. And then, you know, when I used to work on my anger, I'd find that every time I was angry, I would hit the pillow or whatever. And then underneath that would be sadness or loneliness, or that was usually the initial feeling for me, because I didn't have that connection with my dad, because he didn't let me feel that sadness when he was yelling at me or whatever. So I didn't, and that's the sensation that I needed to get to. It's really important that this anger has a place for you to let off steam, whether it's screaming like at the top of a mountain or a place where you feel safe, really allowing yourself to embody that anger and let it out, and having a safe place to do that in. Maybe having a person there with you where you can say, like, I need to let out this anger right now and I need to feel into it. So I need you to be there just in case something happens, or, you know, whatever will make you feel safe. But this anger needs to be let out, and because it's stuck in your body at the moment, you know, it's been for so long, really important that you get it out.
Right. Well, any emotion that we don't feel completely gets stuck. We don't process a whole experience. It gets stuck. And this is so important, because I think that it's easy to have an idea that, oh, when I'm healed from emotional eating or binge eating or overeating or restriction, then I'm just going to be happy all the time. And why I'm angry is because I binge eat. Like, I wouldn't be so angry if I didn't binge eat. But that's just like a sort of placeholder until we're able to really go in and actually process real anger, not just sort of the expression of it. And it's not as painful when we're not judging it. What's painful is judged, half felt emotions.
Exactly.
And a healed person, and not to say, like, you know, the goal is 100% healed. Like, we're always growing, we're always evolving. But in general, like, a relatively healthy person is a very dynamic person. We experience all of these things. It's not ending up in happy, clappy land.
Yeah, exactly. You know, healing basically is all these fragmented parts that I was talking about earlier. It's just reconnecting and establishing that connection with them, so then those parts of us that were disconnected from us can come home to us, and we find complete peace and harmony in our bodies. And what that means is, when a situation arises where we need to be able to feel angry, then we can do that, like you said. And there's a situation where we need to feel sad. For example, if someone passes away, obviously the emotion that, you know, happiness is not really the emotion to be felt there. All emotions are necessary, right? And we need to be able to have that whole spectrum available to us, but unfortunately we don't. And usually we only have one or two emotions, default ones, that we turn to because we are so disconnected from the other ones. So it's about bringing back the parts of us that we've disconnected from, and having that flexibility in being able to, when we need to experience one emotion where it's necessary in that moment, in that context, then we can feel it. And we're not afraid to feel it. And
to get a whole picture, could you talk about going from the time when we were kind of cutting off these parts of ourselves, suppressing these parts of ourselves, trying to stay safe and acceptable and all of these normal, natural things? How does the compulsion develop? The sort of surface need meeting. How does the need meeting? How does the food and body stuff play into this?
Well, it can play in terms of how it plays in. So it just ends up being another coping mechanism, I suppose, growing up. You know, sometimes love, for example, if we didn't get love when we were younger, that's a need that we obviously need to have, love and connection. Sometimes food can be that for us, and we can get that need met through food. Like I said earlier, with the filling up of our bodies through food. Mm-hmm. And also, if our parents showed us love in the way of food compared to everything else, then we can associate love through food. Also, when we come into the world, you know, the first experience and connection we have with our mum is through her breast, right, through milk, through nourishment. So it's normal for us to also have that connection with food in that way, where it's not just about nourishment physically, but nourishment emotionally and through connection. And those are the things that we associate with food. So when people talk about, I don't want to have an emotional connection with food. I just want to eat for, you know, to fuel my body. Like, it doesn't work like that. You know, we need to be able to have that, not get our emotional needs met by food, but, you know, be able to find pleasure through food and be able to feel through food. And because, you know, so much of our society, we have different cultures that connect through food, you know, have emotional connection through food. It's never a bad thing. It's when your only connection of love is through food that it's a problem.
Absolutely. Something else that I heard you talk about recently is the difference between doing and being. And I was thinking about how this is very much a sort of inner child versus the adult version of ourselves. Like, it's very easy to read the podcasts and listen to the podcasts and read the intuitive eating books and be constantly taking in all this information. And what we don't realize is that by not doing anything with it, we're still in that space of child safety. Like, I feel like I'm doing something, but I'm not really making a difference. So all of my safety mechanisms that I've put up are still in place. And to go into the actual, like, being with ourself work, that's what takes the real adult maturity.
Yeah. And it's hard to admit that to yourself too and say, this is what I've been doing, because it's very easy for us because everything is quite subconscious in us. So we don't really have the awareness that we're doing that. We're just like, I read another book, intuitive eating. Because aha moments, when we get these aha moments, they can be kind of like a drug, kind of like a you know, and they can be quite addictive in nature. So we can feel like we're growing and evolving because of these. But if you don't actually implement and take action in your life too, while you have these aha moments, it's not going to change anything. It's kind of just masturbation.
Yeah, totally. And you get the same hit as you do with a new diet book. Reading the self-help books, taking in the podcast, like, yes, I'm changing my life. And you're having like real realizations, mental realizations anyways. But it's kind of just entertainment until it really sinks into the body and sinks into our experience.
Yeah. So the thing is, if nothing's changing, then nothing changes, right? So if you've been doing up until now, if you've been suffering with binge eating for years upon end and you've read all the books and you've listened to all the podcasts, then what you're doing hasn't worked up until now. So it's time for you to do something different and see what else am I missing? What am I avoiding? What am I distracting myself with? And really to go into that and commit your whole life to this process, because it's like going to the gym, right? Or exercising, moving your body. We want to be able to develop and establish a routine with that, you know, something that's fun, something that's sustainable for life. And the same with connecting with ourselves and doing the inner work. It's something that we're going to do forever. It's not a bad thing. It's kind of like you got to eat every day. Connecting with yourself is kind of like connecting with your children. You've got to do that every day. What's up? Is there any parts of you that are feeling like struggling right now? They have any needs that need to be met? It doesn't have to take hours upon end every day. Initially, it might take a little bit longer, the process, because you haven't established, you know, that routine with it yet. But it needs to be a part of your day, just like anything else. And I think I connect with my inner child in between sets at the gym when I'm working out. It doesn't have to be something that you set aside necessarily. but I just check in and be like, okay, so about this trigger that happened earlier on in the day, like what's going on there? What happened? Just connect with that part then, You've got to make it a part of your lifestyle, a part of your day, and it'll make it easier for you. Because I know a lot of people out there are busy and they think that this stuff is going to take up a lot of work. And, usually people have kids or they got careers and they want to look after their hubby or wife or whatever it is. So make it a part of your day and not something that is just another thing on the to-do list, because if you make it that, then you're not going to do the work. It's just going to be another chore for you, and you'll sit down and be like, okay, it's okay to feel that. That's fine. But you're not actually emotionally connected. You're just you're like a robot. You're doing the movements, you're doing what you're supposed to do, but you're not feeling into it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work like that. You have to completely validate that feeling and emotion and be 100% present with it. You can't just do it just to do it and try to get on the other side of it so it goes away. If your intention is that, you're going to have a hard time getting past this. You have to actually stay in the emotion and the feeling until that part feels validated. And that's the main goal. That should always be your intention when you're feeling a particular feeling or emotion. And I'd say with the people that feel quite numb to their emotions and not sure where to start, the best thing is to really go about situations. Get yourself into situations and put yourself into situations that make you feel uncomfortable, whether it be having a conversation with someone, whether it be setting boundaries, whether it be going to the gym, if that's something that you feel stuck on. Just taking that small steps and seeing what triggers come up for you and what uncomfortable feelings come up, and really try and the best thing to do in that experience is when that uncomfortableness comes up, the breath is the best way to get yourself back into the body. So using the breath, taking a deep breath for 3-4 counts, holding at the top for 2 and releasing for 5 counts, really gets you into the body and feeling the sensation. So we always start with the breath into the body and then what sensation are you feeling? Because we may not know what feelings yet. If you're numb to yourself, you probably won't know. So that's okay. We just want to feel what sensations. Does it feel hot? Does it feel cold? Does it feel tight anywhere in your body? Where are you establishing any heat, anything like that? Like what sensations? And we start from there. And then what you can also do is print off a feelings list from just Google, just type in list of feelings. And then you can carry it around with you every day or have it on your phone, a screenshot. And whenever you check into the body, maybe you can put a timer on your phone every hour, every few hours, and that will invite you back into your body. So you do the breath. And then what you can do is look at the sheet and then put your finger on which feeling you think that sensation is associated with, because the subconscious is sometimes quite a visual thing. So instead of having to think about it and use your logical mind, if you can just point to the feeling, that's a really good start.
I love that. And something I've found to be really helpful also, like you were talking about numbness, for me, I'll use my own example. I spent a lot of time feeling very numb and feeling like, well, I just feel nothing. I don't feel anything. And something that really softened that was being like, okay, so what does nothing feel like? Like, what is this nothing? And what is the sensation of numbness? Like you were saying, there's often a cool feeling or a hot feeling or a sparkly or a bubble. Like there's always something. So what does numbness feel like for you? It's going to be different for each of us. And that begins to melt it. So you can feel a bit more of what's underneath. You are amazing, really, truly. I got so caught up in that. I have no elegant ending. Just thank you. And I want to send everybody your way to your still very active group where you share videos and posts, and I've been just swimming in them for the last few days. So I know that they're incredibly high quality and incredibly useful like this. So very, very practical. And you can go and you can ask questions, and it's a great environment. It's great because people can ask their questions and you answer, and the entire group benefits from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Randi. I love you so much. I love your work.
I love you. You are
a pleasure to come on again.
Yes, this is so sweet. Thank you.